Testing. Sounds like it's working. A little feedback. Mostly I'll stay here.
Because the speakers need to be in front of you, so that's
Uh-huh.
what happens.
Okay.
And Trevor will give you a thumbs up, and then you state your name and date.
You.
Ready.
All right. Thumbs are up. Okay. Good morning, everyone. And I am Hugh Odhner. This is Freiburg New Church Assembly. I believe it's Monday, probably the 7th of August now. And the topic for the week was finding holiness in the Word now and every day. It's interesting, it was Providence, I think, that when that topic came out, I had been reading a little booklet, a book, and it's extracts from the Apocalypse Explained. The chapter that I had been reading there it is the holiness of the Word. So there I was reading that, and out comes the topic of the program. They just blended together. Now, one of the things that most of you, either online, see this schedule and get a copy of this schedule. Say yes or no. But there was an interesting thing. Susanna, did you make up the schedule with the little picture? Oh, well, in the program, it has a picture over here with a quote. And the picture is of a man named Smith Wigglesworth. How many people here have heard of Smith Wigglesworth? Denise has. She even heard about it before I mentioned it, too. Smith Wigglesworth was a evangelist and faith healer. He was one of the precursors of what we now call the charismatic movement. And I just thought, because this quote is very good. He says, "I find nothing in the Bible but holiness, and nothing in the world but worldliness. Therefore, if I live in the world, I will become worldly. On the other hand, if I live in the Bible, I will become holy." There is a lot of truth in that statement. Just think, even out of the charismatics and faith healers, we have these gems of wisdom. So, finding holiness in the Word now and every day. I'm going to do something like Gar did, which is reading passages, but departing from them. So, the first thing is a chapter on the holiness of the Word and wherein, to use their language, wherein the holiness of the Word resides. It says something like what Gard was saying. And there we go. Reading there, and I'm not using a Dole translation because I don't think he translated this. This is from the Apocalypse Explained. For those interested, the translator was a man named Agar. "It was said of old that the Word is from God, divinely inspired and thus holy, and yet it has not been known heretofore, that is up to now, wherein the Word the divine resides." And that's almost what you're saying. The very clearly. And then it goes on, but that it may be known that the Word is divine, not only in every meaning, but also in every expression, its internal sense, which is spiritual, and which is in the external sense, which is natural, as a soul and a body, has now been revealed. This sense can bear witness to the divinity and consequent holiness of the Word, and can convince even the natural person, I'm going to change man to person, but even a natural person, that the Word is divine, and then this qualifier, if he is willing to be convinced. There is in this a number of qualifiers that this is the truth, if you're willing to accept it. So, and by the way, this little book, and it's still in print, but I think in a paperback, and it has a yellow cover to it. It tells you where in the Apocalypse explained the quote comes from. In this case, it was 1065. Now, we are generally used to thinking of the Word as having three senses within it: a celestial, a spiritual, and a natural. This section talks about four senses. So, it goes on and talking about, in as much as divine truth, which is the Word, in its descent into the world from the Lord, has passed through the three heavens, so it's descending from the Lord through the three heavens, it has become accommodated to each heaven, and lastly to people in the world. And then it describes these senses. This is why there are in the Word four senses, one outside of the other, from the highest heaven down to the world, or one within the other. These four senses are called the celestial, the spiritual, and the natural. But then it has, that sounds three, but it divides it a little bit further because of that natural. It says these four are called the celestial, the spiritual, and the natural, from the celestial and the spiritual, and then the merely natural. And by the way, how do we get that? Because there's the celestial heaven, the spiritual heaven, but the natural heaven is actually divided into two kingdoms, which is one part is related to the celestial heaven, the other is related to the spiritual. Or to put it another way, in the natural heaven you have those people who are more affectional and more, you might say, affected by love, and those of us who are more affected by truth. And so that natural heaven is divided. And then we come down into the world. So, it talks about this last is for the world, the next for the lowest heaven, the spiritual for the second heaven, and the celestial for the third. These four senses differ so greatly from one another that when one is exhibited beside the other, no connection can be realized. Each heaven has its own word, and they are related by correspondence, one within the other. But you can read them together, and it doesn't sound like they're related. Later on in the week, I'll be talking about differences in passages that you can see from this. And then it goes on. And yet they make one when one follows the other. For one follows the other as an effect from a cause, and then gets into philosophical terms, which I don't want to go into, but they're related to each other. So 4 senses: celestial, spiritual, the natural from the celestial and the spiritual, and the natural for the world. Then it goes on. From all this, these truths follow. The outmost sense of the word, which is the sense of the letter. That's the one we have in the world. And the 4th in order contains in itself the 3 interior senses, which are for the 3 heavens. That's the other thing, that the word that we have in the world contains within itself the other 3 senses. And these 3 senses are unfolded and exhibited in the heavens. And then the qualifier: when a person on earth is reverently reading the word. Now this is where we come in, because we can be reverently reading the word. With some of us, it's the King James Version, by the way. Reverently reading it, and it communicates to those heavens that we're not aware of right there. But they are in delight when we read the word. One of the things about charity is that we can be doing charity even when we're not thinking about that. Just the mere act of reading the word reverently is doing something useful for the angels who are associated with us and around us. They pick up that reverence and they see in what we're reading the things that we don't see, but it affects them greatly. And then their delight affects us, because we get something back of their feeling and delight in the word. And that's why many of us, we have an affection for reading the word, even in places where it doesn't seem to make sense to us. It's just delightful. I should tell you that I have had for many years, a practice of reading the Old and New Testaments, more than I have read the Third Testament, as I call it, or the writings. Because there's just a certain delight there. And I also know that the angels are picking up more than I am, but they are reflecting back and say, we're really liking your reading this. Here, have some of our joy. So, now, each sense of the word is within the other. When we read it reverently, we have communication with heaven. And this is mentioned. These 3 senses are unfolded and exhibited in the heavens when a person on earth is reverently reading the word. Then it goes on. Therefore, the sense of the letter is that from which and through which there is communication from heaven. And that communication isn't necessarily an intellectual thing. It's an affectional thing. And we pick that up. And it's why we continue reading, because of the affection we're picking up. Very important for us, but also for being useful to the heavens. You might almost say that they rely upon us to read reverently. And also from which and through which a person has conjunction with the heavens. The sense of the letter of the word is the basis of divine truth in the heavens, and without such a basis, divine truth would be like a house without a foundation. So that's the other thing. We're being useful to the heavens as a basis that they need. And we just don't normally think, hey, the heavens, and they're all around us, and the angels are around us, and we're associated, but they're getting something and need that. So, I wanted to go on here. In the sense of the letter of the word, through which a person is enlightened by the Lord, and then this, and through which he receives answers when he wishes to be enlightened. It is the sense of the letter of the word by which everything of the doctrine on earth, or teachings on earth, must be established. In other words, doctrinal things and teachings must be established by that sense of the letter. But this thing, if we wish to be enlightened by the word, if we're looking for answers, they can be found there. Now, sometimes not in the way that we're looking for them. For example, just a simple thing. The topic for this week is the holiness of the Word. What was I reading? The holiness of the Word. More than just a coincidence, you might say it was a divine preparation. The Lord and the angels are saying, we know what the top is going to be. You don't know what it is going to be, but here's the answer. And it comes about in other ways. Sometimes it's, how do I deal with my sister or brother that I don't get along with? And somebody was speaking about that, and I wrote some sermons just about those conflict between two brothers, you know. There's also conflict between sisters. One is one way, one has to take care of every little thing, and the other one just wants to sit and listen. Each are doing a useful thing, and then you have that prodigal son who runs out and lives riotously. And then he's welcomed back by his father. And the other one is really ticked off about this. And we can understand that because it reflects some of us. Those are stories in the Word that are talking about us. Not just our relationship with our brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers and people in the world, but they also represent the conflicts within ourselves. They represent two different sides of ourselves, but we tend to want to see it externally as if it's outside of us. Takes a bit more effort to say, oh, I'm the good son, and I'm also the prodigal one. To see that in ourselves. In going on with receiving answers, many people want a definite answer, and they will go to the Word looking for it. Some people, for example, they need an answer, and they just open the Word to a random passage. They go down, and there it is. I've done it sometimes, and needing a topic for a sermon. Some ministers, and I'm one of them, have periods of blankness. I guess it's a writer's block or something. Don't have an idea. And so I'll open the Word and said, there's the topic. And Denise knows I'll do this. You know, she'll ask me what the topic is going to be. And I said, I have no idea yet. You know, and I just open up the Word, and it's kind of an insight. It's actually, I would hope, it's the angels communicating with me. This is the answer you're seeking. I hope it's not the evil spirits. But that is one of the things. The other in receiving answers is enlightenment. And Gard, you were talking about that enlightenment. Some people like the term illumination, which I translate as the same thing. We were at a camp last week, and the subject for one day was illumination. I changed that to enlightenment because I can't deal with illumination. To me, illumination is given off by a candle. But enlightenment comes from the Lord. So, there it is. In the Word and in every particular of it, there's a spiritual sense. And in that sense, a divine celestial sense, one within the other, which regarded it itself is divine truth itself, which is in the heavens and which gives wisdom to angels. That's good, but it continues to go on. And enlightenment to people. Though that same sense gives enlightenment to us, gives wisdom to the angels. Now, the divine truth in the heavens is like going forth from the Lord as a son. Starts with the Lord, which is divine love. And this is the other thing. The wisdom starts out as love. The Lord is love itself. The first thing that comes from that love is wisdom. And as divine truth, as the divine truth that goes forth from the Lord is the light of heaven, so it is divine wisdom. It is this that illuminates both the minds and eyes of angels, and it is this that also enlightens the minds of people. So the Lord is giving us. And then it goes on, but not their eyes. So it doesn't enlighten our eyes, but our spirit, and enables them, that is us, to understand truth and also to perceive good when a person reads the word from the Lord and not from self. And then this, for he is then a participator with the angels. In other words, we are participating with the angels and working with them to get enlightenment. And when this comes about, there's an inward perception like the spiritual perception of angels. That spiritual perception which the angel man, which is what it says, has, flows into the natural perception, which is his own while in the world, and enlightens it. Consequently, the person who reads the word from an affection for truth has enlightenment through heaven from the Lord. That's Apocalypse explained, by the way, 1067. A big part of this is that we are in the natural sense of the word. We are in the sense of the letter, but within that sense of the letter, there are these other senses. If we're willing and able, we can perceive something of those senses. Usually, it's more from an affection, as I mentioned earlier. A number of years ago, I think I did a talk here on the 6 degrees of divine truth. The first degree is the Lord itself. The first degree below that, which would be the second degree, is the spiritual Son. So you get love, and then the light from that sun is truth. It also says, but that's way above our perception. That's like the Lord himself. After that is the third level is wisdom that is for the celestial angels. That's so far above us that we don't even have any perception of it. Then comes, as you might guess, the next level down, which is the fourth level. That is for the spiritual angels, the spiritual heaven. And then we get the natural heaven. Now, we'd think, oh, the natural heaven, that's where I am. Not quite. Even the natural heaven is above us. But what it does say is that we can sometimes get some ideas from that heaven, of the truth of that heaven. And in what I've read, it occurs mostly without words, but as images. Sort of this thing sometimes that was talked about with dreams. We get images, but we don't have the words with them. That is like our communication with the natural heaven. More is wordless images, and it's brief insights. We know that something is happening, but we can't quite express it in words. Maybe many of us have had times where we know something, but we just can't put it into words. We have an image of it, but you can't quite put it into words. Maybe it's possible, but I'm not an artist, for some people to draw an image of this is what I'm experiencing and pass that on to another. I think many artists have an idea and they can draw it, but they can't put it into words. It's an affectional thing that falls into images. The final sense, though, is where it falls into words. That's the sixth degree. That's the one we have in the world. And it is that sense from which, when it talks about answers in the Word, when we are in a state to receive them, when we're wanting answers, the answers are there, but not always in a form that we're thinking of. I am finished, by the way. Are there questions, comments?
Denise Cowley here. I guess you'd say my takeaway from both yours and Guard's lectures are read the Word.
I think that would be pretty, and
with affection.
with affection.
And out of that, the angels gain something and we gain something back from the angels. So there's a mutual charity. You know, thinking of reading the Word as an act of charity is I won't say a new thought, but it may be a recurring thought that maybe I had it years ago and forgot. But sometimes I lose track because the Word, you know, I can practically recite parts of it without thinking about it. And that was another beautiful insight, is that when I am reciting it without thinking about it, there is that beauty and something directly from the Lord that comes out of saying the 23rd Psalm, just from that childhood. And that was the old King James Version. And most of what I have memorized are old King James. not that the other translations aren't wonderful also, but that one does hold something special for many of us. But the other thing was the Lord speaking in parables, which Gard touched on. And then talking about moving mountains, that's a parable. And the Lord spoke not without parables, so that all of those things that become troubling on one level, or appear troubling on one level, become beautiful and easy to understand when we raise our understanding to the interior. There are probably a lot more things I could say, but that's reading the word reverently gives us so much and gives the angels so much, and is an act of charity. It's just such a lovely thought. Thank you.
I would like you to read that quote that you read at the very beginning about being in the world and only the world, and then heaven, or in the spiritual and only in the spiritual. There's something about it that troubled me, but I'd like you to read it again.
Right right at the beginning of the
At the
talk?
very beginning, please.
Okay, let's see.
From the page you held up, the Wigglesworth one.
Oh, the Wigglesworth. Yes, yes. Yeah, this is a quote from Smith Wigglesworth. It says, "I find nothing in the Bible but holiness, and nothing in the world but worldliness. Therefore, if I live in the world, I will become worldly. On the other hand, if I live in the Bible, I will become holy."
That really bothered me because I see a lot in the world that's holy. But after listening to your lecture, I am processing it this way, that the Bible, reading the Bible, you get the spiritual, the celestial, the spiritual. It comes down to the Bible natural. And by reading that, then we more understand the worldly natural.
Yeah, I would say use the word perception. We perceive not just the truth, but the affection.
Because I probably understand what's around me because I do have that faith.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
This is
Suzanne.
Susanna. I just wanted to say I'm really glad you brought up about how sometimes the affectional can't be put into words. It's ineffable. It's beyond words. And when I look at my life, there are places where I could ask myself, in my thinking and in my experience, how did I get from here to there? When I can't figure it out, there was no linear progression, I know it was God.
Yeah.
I would like to thank you for speaking about the communication from the angels to us when we're reading those passages that seem completely ununderstandable. And there have been times that I have gone to the Bible for comfort, and I have gotten uncomfort instead. But it's nice to know that there was the affectional flow from the angels when I was reading prayerfully.
Yeah, that's one of the things. There are these passages in the Word of the Old and New Testaments that it even says, what is this? Why is this here? This doesn't sound holy. I don't expect God to speak in this way. But if we read it reverently, the angels pick up the internal, holiness, and it affects them. So we're doing, just by doing it, sometimes forcing ourselves. I need to read this because I'm supposed to, but they get something out of it. And the affection, bit by bit, is communicated to us. Not necessarily the knowledge, but the affection.
Yeah, that gave me a thought. So, we're wondering sometimes how we can affect the world.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe when we're reading the Bible and we're affecting the angels, and the angels give us joy, but maybe those same angels are giving other people joy too, because we're reading the Bible. So if many people were reading the Bible, maybe the angels not only are affecting those people that are reading the Bible, but they're also giving insights and affections of what we're reading to other people.
That's the communication of one with all in the other world. We're getting somewhat close to that. That through these worldly, natural means, that is electronics and so forth, there is a spreading of the knowledge and affection of one to others. In the other world, they don't need the electronics.
So that could mean charity. We have a divine, use or something, divine need to read our Bible.
Yeah.
I just want to
Guard.
say, it occurred to me this morning, sitting next to my grandson, when we all said the Lord's Prayer together, which was taught in Matthew, that is a beginning for the kids to feel the power of us all being in a certain place in the Bible together. And I
Yeah.
love that there's a special power when we say it all as one, as a
In
body.
unison.
Okay, thank you, Hugh, for your lovely talk. Well, just a couple things. One is to observe the kind of mystical version of the conversation and the teaching. So the heavens and the earth and our mind and the angels. So I think of this as a form of mysticism. That's a good thing. And then the agency of the individual, which is a more simple idea, a single person reading the Bible whose interior mind is opened. So there's your individual. And of course the two can go together. I might observe too that when I think of the angels and the heavenly host, it can be thought of two ways. One is around us, which is a little bit of a spatial metaphor with distance. The other is within us. So the interior realm is also infinite. It's not conscious, but it's interior, and of this would be the containment. So the eyes open to the physical world would be the outermost, and then the levels of the mind are inner, and then the heavens are within that. So it's all interior. Those are two ways to think of it. And while I'm thinking of another version of this too, so while I was hearing Hugh say to read the Bible reverently, I can observe that I can think of a specific way to do that, because what's reverently? That's what it is. It's what is it? So the more specific way I think of that, a version of it, now many of them, is to read it contemplatively and to simply select a version of, could be three verses of a psalm, simply upon which to rest the mind. And I was speaking of this at one point during my talk, but this is a specific way of reading reverently, is to, like the 23rd Psalm, something beautiful, consolation, comfort, instruction, something we need, you feel like you need. And anyway, the mind then rests on those verses, and there's a way in which one becomes the verse. We're in it now. And the mind is still open, and there's inspiration, there's insight, and it's literal, it's real, it's specific. So these are more specific ways of thinking of reverence. And I'll close by saying that one could also ask the question, enlightenment. What's enlightened? Or perception? What are we perceiving? Or insight. What do we see when we're having insight? So if I then go back to answer that question for myself, I go back to what the Swedenborg was teaching. It was said about 15 times between the two lectures. What is illuminated is a more insightful, deeper, loving way to love the neighbor. It can be somebody specific, a healed relationship, and it can be a more specific way to feel loved by the Lord. Susanna.
I just want to add a piece to what Gard said, because we're talking about the Lord and how we're perceiving, but there's also how we perceive as a community. Yeah. And that was, in the doxology that I rewrote, it's praise God within, among, and above. Because we get so much from community. We get, when we study Bible passages together, when we hear lectures together, when we discuss together, we matter to each other. We are one body in Christ. And it is very important for us not to just focus on our individual, getting insightful and really receiving the Lord. Because the community of angels is a community too. We're not just reading the Bible so that we can hear it or one angel can hear it. It's all the angels that are drawn to it. And that's a community. And I'm just really strong on community being the way that we really, truly can experience Christ's love for us. We talked about that the other day, about the love that we have love for the neighbor because we're supposed to, and then we have love to the neighbor because we want to, and then we have love to the neighbor as the Lord loves us. And all those levels require community.
Yeah. That's the idea of being useful. It's not in a vacuum. So.
Denise again. It is hard to articulate, but I just see all of this coming together in that we are a community within us and without us, and above and below. The 6 degrees, we do communicate. Yeah, we are only conscious of that lowest degree, 99% of humanity, 99% of the time. But that doesn't mean that it's not always within us and working level after level out from the Lord and in the circle of life, so to speak. And so the community aspect is very important. That is, reading the Word is an act of charity because we communicate with the heavens through it. And I know I tend to sort of put it down sometimes as such a sort of natural thing to do. I know all that stuff. I don't know all that stuff, and there's infinite wisdom within every word. The kaleidoscopic idea of or the holographic idea of the word. Within every word, there is infinite wisdom. And so my reading it individually is communicating with a whole community here and with a whole community, the whole community of heaven. We think so naturally, typically, as Wigglesworth was talking about, we can live in the world or we can live in the Word. And if we live in the Word, then we're communicating on a huge level, and everything we do is no longer purely natural. It is spiritual if we live in the Word. And did that make any sense? It's sort of, it is a picture that I feel inside me, but it's really hard to express in words, I guess.
Yeah, I think when Wigglesworth was talking about here, on the other hand, if I live in the Bible or the Word, I will become holy. Now, he might have been thinking just on the individual level, but we can expand that, as Martha was saying. It affects the angels around us, and they affect angels around them. So when we are living in the Word, reading the Word, practicing the Word, it's just spreading out and affecting it, probably to some degree, not to all the ends of heaven, and that's just this heaven. Then
Yep.
You've got the whole of the universal heaven.
One knowledge we get from the writings is that we live in a community.
Yeah.
We are a community inside us and outside us, in the natural and spiritual world. And so we really are constantly communicating with and affecting both the natural and the spiritual in everything we do. And reading the Word is the direct connection from the Lord down through the heavens to us that is absolutely trustworthy, whereas we might have some other enlightenment or connections that might not be quite as trustworthy. But that one you can count on.
Yeah.
We're at time, so I want to thank Hugh for his contribution, and we'll be meeting back here at 11 for a discussion group.